Hey guys, welcome back to our study of the Phantom Tollbooth. Before we start chapter 11, I want to give you just a quick, I'm going to try to go as fast as I can, little lesson on how authors use play on words. Okay, they'll use word play to make their things interesting. Okay, and one of the ways Norton Juster, who is the author of the Phantom Tollbooth, Norton Juster does this with many words in the book, but he really uses names it's like this play on words, and you've got to really think about it. If you don't really think about it, a lot of times it's easy to just read over because they can be a little confusing. So I want to go over a couple of characters that we have met so far, or we will be meeting, that and you're going to find that again in the chapter we're going to read today. Well, the first one is King Azaz the Unabridged. Okay, so I want you to look at his name. King Azaz the Unabridged. We briefly went over this in another video, but you have Azaz. So his name starts with A, which is the first letter of the alphabet. It ends with Z, the last letter of the alphabet. So King Azaz's name is from A to Z, okay? Well, this word here, unabridged, you'll see that with books, dictionaries use it, and it means that it's complete, it's missing nothing. So if we think about this particular character, King Azaz the Unabridged, he is the king of all words from A to Z with no words missing at all. Okay, so that's one king that we've met already. Now, Math Magician, his brother, we've not met him yet. We've only been told about him. So he's going to be a really important character here in a few chapters. But think about his name, okay, this play on words. You have a Math Magician. So we are combining two words. So when you think of the word mathematician, you may have heard that word before, right? Okay, you may think of Mrs. Biggerstaff as a mathematician. She is an expert in doing math and understanding numbers. Okay, well then you've also heard of the word magician, okay, who does magic tricks. And so this character that we're going to meet actually works magic with math, okay? And then we met Talk. We've been told about his brother Tick. Okay, and so the funny little thing about them, and I'm sure you caught this already in the story at the beginning when we met Talk, was the story about his name, about their names and the sounds that they make. Okay, so Talk makes the sound tick, 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 and Tick makes the sound talk, 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 talk. So their names actually are opposite of the sounds that they make. Okay, and then the last chapter, before we get started, the last chapter that we read, we met Chroma the Great. Okay, and if you remember, I told you we were going to talk about that word, chroma, because every person's name pretty much means something in this book. I think you're finding out, right? Well, the word chroma has this whole idea of color, obviously, right? Okay, so you may have heard some of these words in art, like monochromatic. Chromatic this is the root word. It means color. I think it's a Greek word that means color. You don't have to know that, just that it means color. Well, Chroma the Great, conducts the orchestra that colors the world. So if you've ever been to a concert where you have an orchestra of instruments, okay, we normally hear their beautiful sound and we listen to that beautiful music of all those instruments playing together. Well, Chroma the Great's symphony is different from that. We don't hear anything, but they see. They paint the colors of the world, the sunset, the sunrise, all of those things in between. Okay, and so yesterday we left off with Chroma the Great, and he had gone to sleep, remember? And so he told Milo, wake me exactly at 5:23 in the morning. I have to do the sunrise. Okay, and so then we have Milo who falls asleep. Now, you're going to, in this chapter, be reading about some other names that the author uses this play on words. So we're going to go over them when we get to that part, because I don't want you to, I don't want to spoil it for you. So I want you to think now, before we read, about this whole idea of doctors, right? So I'm sure every one of us has been to a doctor. where we go to, the doctor here, she will treat different parts of the body. Sophia's mom is a doctor of the eyes, right? Emma Cassidy's dad is a doctor, anesthesiologist, so he uses medicines to help people when they're having surgeries and all of that. So you've got different kinds of doctors, right? Well, we're going to be meeting a doctor today that's very different from any kind of doctor you and I would think about, and his name is Dr. Discord. Okay, so before we meet Dr. Discord, I want you to think about the worst sound you can possibly dream up in your mind. Okay, the worst. Think about it. So like that sound of like nails on a chalkboard, like it just hurts, doesn't it? It sounds horrible. Or maybe when you're sitting across from somebody at lunch and they're like eating all their food and it's just disgusting because they're smacking their food. So many sounds, okay? But almost everyone has a few sounds that you just can't stand, right? All of us could probably think of those. Well, Milo is going to meet someone in this chapter whose business is selling terrible sounds, terrible noises, okay? So can you imagine having that job and doing that for a living, like going around and selling noises that are just horrible that no one wants to hear? And what's even more surprising is that this man claims that lots of people want to buy noises from him, okay? So with that, we're going to start chapter 11, Discord and Den. One by one, the hours passed, and at exactly 5:22, by Talk's very accurate clock, Milo carefully opened one eye, and in a moment, the other. Everything was still purple, dark blue, and black, yet scarcely a minute remained to the long, quiet night. He stretched lazily, rubbed his eyelids, scratched his head, and shivered once as a greeting to the early morning mist. "I must wake Chroma for the sunrise," he said softly. Then he suddenly wondered what it would be like to lead the orchestra and to color the whole world himself. I mean, who wouldn't want to do that, right? You get the opportunity to lead an orchestra, like, I would probably want to sneak and try it too. So the idea whirled through his thoughts until he quickly decided that since it couldn't be very difficult, and since they probably all knew what to do by themselves anyway, and since it did seem a shame to wake anyone so early, and since it might be his only chance to try, and since the musicians were already poised and ready, he would, but just for a little while. And so, as everyone slept peacefully on, Milo stood on tiptoes, raised his arms slowly in front of him, and made the slightest movement possible with the index finger of his right hand. It was now 5:23 a.m. As if understanding his sign or his signal perfectly, a single piccolo, sort of like a flute, little flute, played a single note, and off in the east, a solitary shaft, a single shaft of cool lemon light flicked across the sky. Milo smiled happily. I bet he thought he was doing well, right? And then cautiously crooked his finger again. This time, 2 more piccolos and a flute joined in, and 3 more rays of light danced lightly into view. Then with both hands, he made a great circular sweep in the air and watched with delight as all the musicians began to play at once. The cellos made the hills glow red, and the leaves and grass were tipped with a soft pale green as the violins began their song. Only the bass fiddles rested as the entire orchestra washed the forest in color. Milo was overjoyed because they were all playing for him, and just the way they should. Won't Chroma be surprised, he thought, signaling the musicians to stop. I'll wake him now. But instead of stopping, they continued to play even louder than before until each color became more brilliant than he had thought possible. Milo shielded his eyes with one hand and waved the other desperately, but the colors continued to grow brighter and brighter and brighter until an even more curious thing began to happen. As Milo frantically conducted, the sky changed slowly from blue to tan and then to a rich magenta red. Flurries of light green snow began to fall, and the leaves on the trees and bushes turned a vivid orange. All the flowers suddenly appeared black. The gray rocks became a lovely soft chartreuse, and even peacefully sleeping talk changed from brown to a magnificent ultramarine. Nothing was the color it should have been, and yet the more he tried to straighten out things, the worse they became. Oh, I wish I hadn't started, he thought unhappily, as a pale blue blackbird flew by. And that just is odd, right? A pale blue blackbird. Blackbirds are supposed to be black. There doesn't seem to be any way to stop them. He tried very hard to do everything just the way Chroma had done, but nothing worked. The musicians played on faster and faster, and the purple sun raced quickly across the sky. In less than a minute, it had set once more in the west, and then without any pause, risen again in the east. The sky was now quite yellow, and the grass a charming shade of lavender, which is like a pale purple color. 7 times the sun rose and almost as quickly disappeared as the colors kept changing. In just a few minutes, a whole week had gone by. At last, the exhausted Milo, afraid to call for help and on the verge of tears, dropped his hands to his sides. The orchestra stopped. The colors disappeared, and once again it was night. The time was 5:27 a.m. So if you think about that, Chroma told him 5:23. He's 4 minutes late. "Wake up, everybody! Time for the sunrise!" he shouted with relief and quickly jumped from the music stand. "What a marvelous rest," said Chroma, striding to the podium. "I feel as though I'd slept for a week," which he had, right? Because Milo messed up things. My, I see we're a little late this morning. I'll have to cut my lunch hour short by 4 minutes. He tapped for attention. And this time, the dawn proceeded perfectly. "You did a fine job," he said, patting Milo on the head. "Someday I'll let you conduct the orchestra yourself." I don't guess he knows, does he? Milo actually already did that. Top wagged his tail proudly, but Milo didn't say a word. And to this day, no one knows of the lost week, but the few people who happened to be awake at 5:23 on that very strange morning. Chroma nodded a fond goodbye as they all started back through the forest. And in honor of the visit, he made all the wildflowers bloom in a breathtaking display. "I'm sorry you can't stay longer," said Alex sadly. "There's so much more to see in the Forest of Sight. But I suppose there's a lot to see everywhere, if only you keep your eyes open." They walked for a while, all silent in their thoughts, until they reached the car, and Alec drew a fine telescope from his shirt and handed it to Milo. "Carry this with you on your journey," he said softly, "for there is much worth noticing that often escapes the eye." You know, a telescope is a long thing that helps you see far away. Through it, the telescope, you can see everything from the tender moss in a sidewalk crack to the glow of the farthest star. And most important of all, you can see things as they really are, not just as they seem. It is my gift to you. Milo placed the telescope carefully in the glove compartment and reached up to shake Alec by the hand. Then he stepped on the starter and with his head full of strange new thoughts, drove out the far end of the forest. The easy rolling countryside now stretched before them in a series of dips and rises that leaped up one side of each crest and slid gently down the other in a way that made stomachs laugh and faces frown. As they topped the brow of the highest hill, a deep valley appeared ahead. The road, finally making up its mind, plummeted down, as if anxious to renew acquaintance with the sparkling blue stream that flowed below. When they reached the floor of the valley, the wind grew stronger as if funneled through the rocks, and directly ahead, a bright-colored speck grew larger and larger. "It looks like a wagon," cried Milo excitedly. "It is a wagon, a carnival wagon," seconded Talk, and that's exactly what it was. Parked at the side of the road, painted bright red and looking quite deserted, on its side in enormous white letters, bordered in black, was the inscription, "Cacophonous A Discord." And below, in slightly smaller black letters, bordered in white, was "Doctor of Dissonance." Okay, so here's our character we're about to meet, and he is Cacophonous A. Discord, who is the doctor of dissonance. So let me just help you out with what that means, okay? So here you have his name, Cacophonous A. Discord. Now this word cacophonous sounds like the word cacophony, okay? If you look right here, let me fold this. And the word cacophony is like a harsh mixture of sounds. Doesn't sound good, okay? Cacophonous. It's like the word cacophony, which means a harsh mixture of sounds. Then you have the word discord. Yeah, discord. Now, the word discord sounds a lot like discord. It's the same word, just without the H. And it can mean like a disagreement between people. But in music, it means a disagreement or disharmony between notes. So any of you music people out there, you know what that means when you hear notes. Like if you've ever heard someone singing out of tune to the music, it just sounds funny, right? I'm sure you've learned this with Mrs. Savinsky in music class, that discord is not a pleasant sound. Okay, so you have cacophonous A discord, and we're going to learn what the A stands for in just a little bit, what he tells Milo his name stands for. And then underneath that, he said that he was the doctor of dissonance. And that word dissonance, it's just another way of saying discord between notes and music. It's this terrible sound when the notes just don't sound right together, and it just, it's one of those noises that hurt your ears, right? Okay, so here we meet Cacophonous A. Discord, and he has this wagon, this like carnival wagon with his name on the side. Now we're back on page 133. Perhaps if someone's at home, he might tell us how far we have to go, said Milo, parking next to the wagon. He tiptoed timidly up the 3 wooden steps to the door, tapped lightly, and leaped back in fright. For the moment he knocked, there was a terrible crash from inside the wagon that sounded as if a whole set of dishes had been dropped from the ceiling onto a hard stone floor. At the same time, the door flew open, and from the dark interior, a hoarse voice inquired, "Have you ever heard a whole set of dishes dropping from the ceiling onto a hard stone floor?" Milo, who had tumbled back off the steps, sat up quickly while Talk and the humbug rushed from the car to see what had happened. "Well, have you?" insisted the voice, which was so raspy that it made you want to clear your own throat. And I'm going to try to do that, but I don't know how long I'll do it without coughing, so. "Not until just now," replied Milo, getting to his feet. "Ha! I thought not," said the voice happily. "Have you ever heard an ant wearing fur slippers walk across a thick wool carpet?" And before they could answer, he went on in his strange croaking way. "Well, don't just stand there in the cold. Come in, come in. It's lucky you happened by. None of you looks well." The faint glow of a ceiling lamp dimly illuminated the wagon as they cautiously stepped inside. Talk, first eager to defend against all dangers, Milo next, frightened but curious, and the humbug last, ready at any moment to run for his life. "That's right. Now, let's have a look at you," he said. "Very bad, very bad. A serious case." The dusty wagon was lined with shelves full of curious boxes and jars of a kind found in old apothecary shops. It looked as though it hadn't been swept out in years. Bits and pieces of equipment lay strewn all over the floor, and at the rear was a heavy wooden table covered with books, bottles, and bric-a-brac. "Have you ever heard a blindfolded octopus unwrap a cellophane-covered bathtub?" he inquired again, as the air was filled with a loud, crinkling, snapping sound. Sitting at the table, busily mixing and measuring, was the man who had invited them in. He was wearing a long white coat with a stethoscope around his neck. And you all know what a stethoscope is, right? It's one of those things that doctors will use to check your breathing. They put it in their ears, and then they'll say, "Breathe real deep," and they'll put it on there and check your breathing. I lost my place. Okay, with a white coat with a stethoscope around his neck and a small round mirror attached to his forehead. And the only really noticeable things about him were his tiny mustache and his enormous ears. each of which was fully as large as his head. Now, wouldn't you think about, think about this little play on words. Even the way the character looks has to do with sound. He has these large, enormous ears, okay? And he is the doctor of dissonance, of sounds that don't sound right, that are just terrible sounds. "Are you a doctor?" asked Milo, trying to feel as well as possible. "I am Cacophonous A. Discord, doctor of dissonance," roared the man, and as he spoke, several small explosions and a grinding crash were heard. "What does the A stand for?" stammered the nervous bug, too frightened to move. "As loud as possible." So here you have it. So here you've got cacophony, harsh mixture of sounds, which when he talks, that's what we hear. His A stands for as loud as possible. Or do I do it this way? I can't tell. As loud as possible. Discord, the sounds don't go together. Here we go. Bellowed the doctor, and two screeches and a bump accompanied his response. "Now step a little closer. Stick out your tongues." "Just as I suspected," he continued, opening a large dusty book and thumbing through the pages. "You're suffering from a severe lack of noises." He began to jump around the wagon, snatching bottles from the shelves until he had a large assortment in various colors and sizes collected at one end of the table. All were neatly labeled. Loud cries, soft cries, bangs, bongs, smashes, crashes, swishes, swooshes, snaps and crackles, whistles and gongs, squeaks, squawks, and miscellaneous uproar. After pouring a little of each into a large glass beaker, he stirred the mixture thoroughly with a wooden spoon, watching intently as it smoked and steamed and boiled and bubbled. Can't you just see this in your mind happening? "Be ready in just a minute," he explained, rubbing his hands. Milo had never seen such unpleasant-looking medicine and wasn't at all anxious to try any. "Just what kind of doctor are you?" he asked suspiciously. "Well, you might say I'm a specialist," said the doctor. "I specialize in noise." I don't know if I can do this much longer. "All kinds, from the loudest to the softest, and from the slightly annoying to the terribly unpleasant. For instance, have you ever heard a square-wheeled steamroller ride over a full street full of hard-boiled eggs?" he asked, and as he did, all that could be heard were loud crunching sounds. "But who would want all those terrible noises?" asked Milo, holding his ears. "Everybody does," said the surprised doctor. "They're very popular today. Why, I'm kept so busy I can hardly fill the orders for noise pills, racket lotion, clamor salve, and hubbub tonic. That's all people seem to want these days." So that's pretty funny. So he's saying everybody wants these noise pills, racket lotion, clamor salve, and hubbub tonic. And we know what hubbub means, right? Just this loud noises. He stirred the beaker of liquid a few more times and then, as the steam cleared, continued. "Business wasn't always as good. Years ago, everyone wanted pleasant sounds, and except for a few orders during wars and earthquakes, things were very bad." I'm going to read normal now. "But then the big cities were built, and there was a great need for honking horns, screeching trains, clanging bells, deafening shouts, piercing shrieks, gurgling drains, and all the rest of those wonderfully unpleasant sounds we use so much of today. Without them, people would be very unhappy. So I make sure they get as much as they want. Why, if you take a little of my medicine every day, you'll never have to hear a beautiful sound again. Here, try some." "If it's all the same to you, I'd rather not," said the humbug, backing away to the far corner of the wagon. "I don't want to be cured of beautiful sounds," insisted Milo. "Besides," growled Talk, who decided that he didn't much like Dr. Discord, "there is no such illness as lack of noise." "Of course not," replied the doctor, pouring himself a small glass of the liquid. "That's what makes it so difficult to cure. I only treat illnesses that don't exist." Now, don't miss what he just said. He only treats illnesses that don't exist. Weird, right? That way, if I can't cure them, there's no harm done. Just one of the precautions of the trade. He concluded, and seeing that no one was about to take his medicine, he again reached toward the shelf, removed a dark amber bottle, dusted it carefully, and placed it on the table in front of him. Very well. If you want to go through life suffering from a noise deficiency, I'll give it all to the den for his lunch, he said, and he uncorked the bottle with a hollow-sounding pop. For a moment, everything was quiet as Milo, Talk, and the humbug looked intently at the bottle, wondering what Dr. Discord would do next. Then, very faintly at first, they heard a low rumbling that sounded miles away. It grew louder and louder and louder and closer and closer and closer until it became a deafening, ear-splitting roar that seemed to be coming from inside the tiny bottle. Then, from the bottle, a thick bluish smog spiraled to the ceiling, spread out, and gradually assumed the shape of a thick bluish smog with hands, feet, bright yellow eyes, and a large frowning mouth. As soon as the smog had gotten completely out of the bottle, it grasped the beaker of liquid, tilted back what would have been its head if it really had one, and drank it all in 3 gulps. "Oh, that was good, master," he bellowed, shaking the whole wagon. "I thought you'd never let me out. Terribly cramped in there." "This is my assistant, the awful Den," said Dr. Discord. "You must forgive his appearance, for he really doesn't have any. You see, he is an orphan whom I raised myself without benefit of governess or any other assistance, for no nurse is a good nurse," interrupted the Den, doubling up with laughter. If you can imagine a thick bluish smog doubling up with laughter. So we have Dr. Den. Before we continue, let me just kind of tell you, his name is the Awful Den. We'll find out in just a minute. And he is the assistant, we're going to find out, of Dr. Discord. And it just simply means, it sounds a lot like Den, D-I-N, okay, although his name is spelled D-Y-N-N-E. The word den is a loud, long, and unpleasant noise. That's what a den is. Okay, so keep that in mind as we read. So Dr. Discord and Den, the Awful Den, are telling how he came to be with Dr. Discord. "For I found him," continued the doctor, ignoring this outburst, "living alone and unwanted in an abandoned soda bottle, without family or relatives. No niece is good niece," roared the Den again, with a laugh that sounded like several sirens going off at once, and he slapped at where his knee should have been. "And brought him here," continued the exasperated Discord, "where despite his lack of shape or features, I train no nose is good nose." And we know that would be no news is good news. Thundered the Den once again as he collapsed in another fit of hysterics and clutched his side. So he's loving his jokes, right? "I trained him as my assistant in the business of concocting and dispensing noise," finished the doctor, mopping his brow with a handkerchief. "No noise is good noise," exclaimed the humbug, happily trying to catch the spirit of things. So here humbug is he catches on, and look at what happens. "That's not funny at all," sobbed the Den, who went to the corner and sulked. He didn't like humbug's joke. "What is a den?" asked Milo, when he had recovered from the shock of seeing him appear. "You mean you've never met the Awful Den before?" said Dr. Discord in a surprised tone. "Why, I thought everyone had. When you're playing in your room and making a great amount of noise, what do they tell you to stop?" "That Awful Den," admitted Milo. "When the neighbors are playing their radio too loud late at night, what do you wish they'd turn down?" "That Awful Den," answered Talk. So you may or may not have heard this. This saying is something that would probably not used as much in our generation as it would have been in generations past. But that's what they called the Awful Den, is all that ruckus and noise. When the street on your block is being repaired and the pneumatic drills are working all day, what does everyone complain of? The dreadful row, volunteered the humbug brightly. The dreadful row, cried the anguished Den, was my grandfather. Another play on words. He perished in the great silence epidemic of 1712. Milo felt so sorry for the unhappy Den that he gave him his handkerchief, which was immediately covered in bluish, smoggy tears. Thank you, groaned the Den. That's very kind, but I certainly can't understand why you don't like noise. Why, I heard an explosion last week that was so lovely I cried for 2 days. The very thought of it upset him so much that he began to sob all over again in a way that sounded almost exactly like a handful, think about this, of fingernails being scratched across a mile-long blackboard. He buried his head in the doctor's lap. He's very sensitive, isn't he? Asked Milo, trying to comfort the emotional Den. It's true, agreed Dr. Discord, but he's right. You know, for noise is the most valuable thing in the world. King Azaz said words are, said Milo. Nonsense, the doctor roared. Why, when a baby wants food, how does he ask? He screams, answered the Den, looking up happily. And when an automobile wants gas, it chokes, he shouted again, jumping for joy. When a river wants water, what does it do? It creaks, bellowed the Den as he collapsed into a fit of uncontrolled laughter. And what happens when a new day begins? It breaks, he gasped joyfully from the floor, a look of utter bliss covering his face. You see how simple it is, the doctor said to Milo, who didn't see at all. And then turning to the tear-stained, smiling Den, he remarked, Isn't it time for you to go? Where to? Asked Milo. Perhaps we're going the same way. I think not, the Den replied, picking up an armful of empty sacks from the table, for I'm going on my noise collection rounds. You see, once a day I travel throughout the kingdom and collect all the wonderfully horrible and beautifully unpleasant noises that have been made, pack them into my sacks, and bring them back here for the doctor to make his medicines from. And a good job he does, said Dr. Discord, pounding his fist on the table. So wherever the noise is, that's where you'll find me, said the Den, with an appreciative smile. And I must hurry along, for I understand that today there's to be a screech, several loud crashes, and a bit of pandemonium. And in which direction are you going? Asked the doctor, mixing another brew. To Digitopolis, replied Milo. How unfortunate, he said as the Den shuffled towards the door. How very unfortunate, for then you must pass through the Valley of Sound. Is that bad? Asked the perpetually worried humbug. The Den paused in the doorway with a look of extreme horror on his almost featureless face, and the doctor shuddered in a way that sounded very much like a fast-moving freight train being derailed onto a mountain of custard. Well, you might ask, for you will find out soon enough, and was all he would say as he sadly bade them farewell, and the Den galloped off on his rounds. So let's see what we find out tomorrow when we read chapter 12. Bye-bye, guys.